So, hi everyone, my name is Amy Lipson and I'm the conservation specialist here at Little Traverse Conservancy. A lot of my job involves managing invasive plants on our nature preserves, and you guys probably have a lot of those same invasive plants on your properties as well. So I thought I would share today how I manage them and go over which invasive species you're most likely to find on land here in northern Michigan. If you have any questions, we can go over those at the end, or you can try to get my attention during the presentation, but I might not be able to pay attention to which screen? Which screen? I might not be able to pay attention to everything all at the same time. So let's see, trying to manage the Zoom waiting room and the presentation all at once. Okay. So back to okay, so first we're going to start by going over the invasive plants that I wanted to talk about today. And then after that, we can talk about how to manage them, and then we can have some time for some questions. So let's just dive right into it. I think one of the most common invasive shrubs you're going to find in Michigan really is the autumn olive, the Elaeagnus umbellata. Some people call this Russian olive. I think that's a slightly different species, but in general, they look fairly similar, and a lot of these traits will still apply. It's still invasive. So it's a medium shrub, and sometimes it can reach the size of a small tree. And the way I recognize this one most quickly is that it looks like someone sprayed it in hairspray and then threw a bunch of glitter at it. It looks like it's just covered in silver sparkly dust. And really the only parts of it that aren't silver and shiny are like the flower petals and like the really mature wood, like the bark at the base. Even the twigs and the berries, everything is silvery and glittery. The bark is kind of the cinnamony red color on the twigs, but the more mature bark is going to be like a grayish color with sort of striations. So like sort of like vertical fissures on the bark. Oh, you can't see that at all. Okay, so vertical stripes in the bark that will sort of split apart as it gets more mature. It does have these red berries, or they're technically drupes, but they taste sort of astringent, and they're kind of sweet. They make a decent jam. If you're going to snack on them, chew the berries up or spit them out where you found them, so you're not spreading it all over the place. They were, this plant was introduced initially as like a wildlife food and a wind block, and to prevent erosion. And so the fruit was initially thought like we'll feed wildlife by having fruit on our land, and it just got out of hand. And that's one of the main ways it spreads, is by birds eating the berries and spreading them all over the place. The leaves are a shape that we call lanceolate, and so lanceolate means like shaped like a lance tip. I haven't really seen a lance before, so I think of it as just sort of like a narrow football shape with sort of like a pointed tip to the leaf. They're very silvery on the back. They're so silvery and shiny that I would say you can identify these driving down the highway and just seeing the leaves flashing silver in the wind. The next shrub I wanted to talk about is the Almer honeysuckle. This is probably the most common of our bush honeysuckles. It's an invasive species. We also have some other ones. The Morrow's honeysuckle, Linacea morrowii, is pretty common as well, but they're fairly similar looking. These are medium to large shrubs, and they generally have branches that arch up and over like this. Like think about their branches making kind of like an elegant rainbow arch shape. So they can get pretty big and almost to the size of a very small tree, but they're not going to get as big as like your autumn olive or like a buckthorn tree or something like that. Their leaves are opposite with their branching and how they're arranged. And so if you can see on this diagram, diagram A, those are alternate leaves. They alternate up the stem. But then at B, you can see those are opposite leaves. The leaves are directly across from each other on the twig. I'd say part of that twig looks like it's sub-opposite, where it's just a little bit off from opposite, maybe like 5 millimeters or so off. But then when you get to the top of the twig, they're like exactly opposite. So those are like two different types of opposite branching. You'll notice that the tip of this branch in diagram B has 2 leaves at the top. So it's important to note with opposite branching things, whether or not you have a single terminal leaf at the end of the stick, or if you have 2 leaves at the end of the stick. And the third type of leaf arrangement is whorled leaves, which is in C, and that's much less common. It's pretty rare to have whorled leaves. Sometimes the purple loosestrife will have whorled leaves, for example, but most of our woody plants, it's going to be alternate or opposite. And then the flowers on honeysuckle are very sweet smelling and beautiful, and you can see why it was a very popular landscape plant for a long time. I like to pay attention when I'm identifying it. How close do the flowers sit to the stem? Do the flowers have a stem that connects directly to the twig with very little stem attached to it? Or do the flowers have a little bit more of a stem and then droop down? That'll help you tell the difference between the invasives and the natives. So normally with the invasive ones, they're sitting much closer to the stem than with our native bush honeysuckle, our native Canadian fly honeysuckle. And I'll show you pictures of that in a little bit. These are the berries. As you can see, these berries are very close to the stem, to the twigs on here. The stem that attaches a fruit or a flower to a stem, a branch, is called a peduncle, and I just share that because it's one of my favorite words. So they have very short peduncles, meaning that they're very close set to the stems. The berries can be like a red or like a maroon color, but they're generally in pairs or like little groups of 4. The bark, I think it looks like a churro. It's tan, it's got deep grooves and striations to it. That's when it's more mature, is that it gets that texture. But you can definitely see the vertical striations, the stripes, the fissuring. Even on younger honeysuckle trunks, you'll see like green striping where the furrows will be eventually. So definitely look for the vertical striations in the bark to identify this one. Okay, so telling it apart from the natives, the natives are not super duper common, but we do, I'd say the most common one you would see would be the Canadian fly honeysuckle. The best way to tell this apart is that the berries look really different. So see how the berries here, they are, the berries here are on a much longer peduncle, a much longer stem connecting it to the twig, and they're fused together. The berries are sort of stuck to each other. And the berries also are more oval shaped, and they have like a more matte texture to them. They don't look as shiny. And so those fused together berries are a really clear indication that okay, not going backwards and forward. Okay, sorry about that. I bumped my mouse. Yeah, so the fused berries are a great indication that that's the native honeysuckle. But you don't always have berries on it. So other things to look at is the leaf margin having cilia. So cilia just means lots of little hairs. It's used in all sorts of fields, having cilia. And I like to look on the base of the leaf margin, generally has the most cilia to it, the longest little hairs. The twig is also going to have cilia on it, but the twig is not going to be as unique. Like there's other invasive honeysuckles that are going to have the cilia on the twig. So look for that. And then as far as if the berries are gone, but you can still see the stem where the berries were connected, that peduncle, the Canadian fly honeysuckle, it's going to have a much longer peduncle left over than some of the invasive ones. So if you had like Morrow's honeysuckle, for example, you might have a little peduncle left sticking up, but it might only be like 5 millimeters long or thereabouts. But this one is going to be, more like a centimeter or something, and it's going to be like hanging down. I've read that the leaves can be rarely over 9 centimeters. I normally see the leaves on this one like 4 centimeters at most. Like they're not very big leaves compared to the native ones. Also, they say the Canadian fly honeysuckle can be 4 or 5 feet tall. I've really only seen it like 2 or 3 feet tall in the woods. So again, if you see a really large bush, that could be an indication that it's might not be the native one. And always just pay attention to how a plant is behaving. If it's really taking over and spreading like crazy, that could be an indication that it's invasive. If it's excluding a lot of native plants that should be able to grow with each other, then it might be an indication that you have an invasive species. Okay, there are a couple more honeysuckles I wanted to point out that are native that I don't want you to confuse with invasive honeysuckles. And those are vines. We have the hairy honeysuckle, and basically these vines are just, it's normally pretty easy to tell that they're that these are the native species, because they have their leaves at the very end fused into a cup. So the two leaflets the two leaves at the very end of the stem are going to fuse into a cup, and they're going to be holding the flowers like they're holding a nice little bowl of flowers out for you. And so if you find a vine and you find the little leftover leaves that look like they were fused together at the base, those are probably a native species. There are some cultivars, like ornamental things that could do that, but I haven't ever seen those escaped into the wild. With the hirsuta, obviously it's hairy. Hirsuta is just Latin for hairy, and then glaucus is just the Latin name for the color that this leaf is. So it's going to look the same. It's just not going to be hairy, and it's going to be this grayish green color. And so I just bring that up because before these find a place to climb, before they find like a tree that they can climb up on, they're probably going to scramble around on the ground and look a lot like a shrub. So it's a vine, but it might look like a shrub until it finds something to climb on. Okay, moving on to the common buckthorn, or the Rhamnus cathartica. This one is called cathartic for a reason. It does cause diarrhea in humans and in birds, and so that's why it's one of my most hated trees. It makes the birds sick. You know, the birds are going to eat the berries, and then they're going to be sick and they'll get dehydrated, and it's very unhealthy for them. And it does a very good job of dispersing the seeds all over the place. So this is definitely a higher priority species to control if you can get a handle on it. And this one has it's male and female trees, so that makes it dioecious. That's the word for when the plant has separated the sexes of its flowers down onto different individuals. And so that can be an important part of the strategy to control it. Sometimes buckthorn has thorns on it. I know, big surprise. And it's very easy when you're working with this plant and trying to cut it down and rip it out to accidentally poke yourself on a thorn. And I've seen some people get stabbed in a joint, like on their wrist or in their knee or something like that. And because you don't have as much blood flow to those areas, you can get infected there more easily. So it's important to protect those areas while you're working with thorny plants, especially buckthorn. Okay. So to identify this plant, it's important to look at the leaves. So here, let me see if I can grab a little laser pointer thing. So with the leaves, so they have this oval shape with a little tiny tip at the top, and the edges are finely serrated and kind of irregular. But what I look for the most is the vein on the leaf. So sort of divide the leaf into thirds in your mind and think about like the bottom third of the plant, of the leaf. Most of the leaves are going to attach to the main vein down there. So you have your main vein, the midrib, and then you have all these lateral veins that come off of it. And with buckthorn, those lateral veins, they tend to start pretty low on the leaf, on that like bottom third. So that's a good way to differentiate it from some other similar looking plants. Other plants that do that, I can think of mainly dogwoods, but dogwoods are different in that if you break a leaf off, you'll find that it has like a latex in it, and you can sort of dangle half the leaf by the latex that was in the veins of the leaf. And dogwoods also are completely opposite instead of sub-opposite. So I'll show you the bud arrangement in a minute. Okay, so you can see with the buckthorn, the buds are pretty much opposite each other on the stem, but sometimes you get buds that are maybe about 5 millimeters apart from each other on the stem. We call that sub-opposite because it's almost opposite each other, but just not quite. To remember what the buds for buckthorn look like, I tend to imagine that those little black buds that are sort of cone-shaped and leaning in towards the stem together, they kind of look like a hoof, like a cloven hoof to me. So I imagine like it's the devil's footprint on the twigs. This is all just my imagination, but it helps me remember it. Okay, so we also have there we go. There's the bark. It looks a little bit like cherry bark. A lot of people think that cherry trees are buckthorns in the wintertime. A great way to tell them apart is to scratch a twig, a live twig, and smell it. Cherry is going to smell like cyanide because it's a plant that makes cyanogenic glucosides and to deter herbivory, and that's fine, but that's fine for them. But the buckthorn is not going to have that bitter almondy smell that the cherry trees will. Buckthorn also is going to have a bright orange inner bark that we'll show you in a minute, but generally it's going to be the same like dark gray color that cherry trees will be, and have those like horizontal scars that are from the lenticels. So a lenticel is just like those little white dots on the younger branch, and those help it exchange gas. So when the roots are saturated and there's not a lot of oxygen getting into the plant via the roots, the lenticels will help the tree to breathe that way. Okay, so here you can see the scratch on the bottom, that's the orange inner bark. And then you can see that the berries are this dark purple, almost black color. They just start out black and they stay black. They don't like change from red to black when they ripen the way the next plant we're going to look at does. Okay, and then this is just an example of the flowers on a buckthorn plant. You're going to have male flowers and female flowers. You got to take a real close look to tell which is which. And a lot of people never even notice the flowers. This was not a plant that was brought over here because it was beautiful. It was brought over here, I think, because you could plant a bunch of them in a hedge and then hedge them, and then you'd have like this thorny hedge that your neighbor wouldn't want to cross through. It was sort of a more utilitarian plant that you could hedge nicely, and it would grow very aggressively. Okay, so glossy buckthorn is not the same genus as common buckthorn. I don't know why they're both called buckthorns. I guess they look a little bit similar. I haven't really seen thorns on glossy buckthorn either. But it's called Frangula ulmus because it supposedly resembles an alder tree. I guess a little bit. But anyway, it's just another small to medium tree, and it does grow in the same habitat as your alder trees, where it's going to be in the shrubby thicket of a wetland. And I think the most distinctive thing about this tree is the veins on the leaf. You can see how they're very orderly, they're neatly spaced. Unlike common buckthorn, the lateral veins will come off the midrib all along the length of that mid vein. They won't be concentrated down towards the bottom of the leaf. You'll also see that the margin of this leaf is not toothed, it's very smooth. An alder would have a toothed edge, and a common buckthorn would have a toothed edge. So those are some other differences. So the buds on this plant are also really interesting in that they're naked. I mean, they're fuzzy, but we call a bud a naked bud when it doesn't have additional bud scales, which is like an extra layer of, I guess, clothing over the buds. You can think of a bud on a tree or a woody plant or something as like an uninflated balloon, and the balloon is the full leaf or the full flower or something, and it's got everything it needs in that bud to become a leaf or to become a flower. Just all the cells compressed into a little tiny package, and then in the springtime, so that it can leaf out really quickly and bloom really quickly, it just pumps it full of water and sugar and nutrients, and then it expands or blows up like a balloon. So those are really valuable structures, and plants will protect them from the cold and the wind and predators with scales a lot of the times. And some plants will put resin over the scales to protect them, but other plants like glossy buckthorn will just leave them naked, and a lot of times they're tan and fuzzy. So I remember that glossy buckthorn has buds that look like fuzzy little hamsters, and they're not opposite each other the way common buckthorn is. They're alternate on the stem. Those are the flowers. They're perfect in that they have male and female parts to them. That's just what we call those normal flowers in botany, I suppose. And their berries do a different thing than common buckthorn, where they start out red, and then as they ripen, they become dark purple. So you'll see both colors on the plant at the same time most of the time. And compared to common buckthorn, it really likes wet areas. You're not going to see this in a dry area, and it can handle a lot more inundation of the soil. Okay. The next one is barberry. For some, I didn't put the Latin up there. I'm sorry. For some reason, this one is still sold in nurseries. You can go to your landscape supply and you can buy a barberry bush, and it'll normally be like a maroon or a purple color. And then they're just sold for their fall color or their red berries, or, they're covered in spines, and you have to hedge them into a shape. And so you have clippings all over the ground when you do that. They're full of spines, and then you've got to clean up the spiny clippings. I don't understand why anybody would want this plant. Maybe they're just hiring somebody else to do all the touching the sharp spiny bits. I used to do that. It wasn't fun. But a great way to identify them, I'll start with the leaves. They are teardrop shaped. They're sort of look like little droplets of water because they don't have a distinctive stem to them. The leaf just sort of tapers down into the stem, and you can't say this is where the stem starts and the leaf stops. It's just all sort of a gradient. They're kind of oval shaped and waxy. They're very smooth. Sometimes they get like a purple color to them. Kind of depends on how much light they're getting. More light, more purple color. That pigment just as like sunscreen. They get these, there's the purple color with the flowers. I guess it's kind of pretty. I don't know. The berries are kind of nice looking. I tried eating some last weekend. They were kind of tasty. They're not all tasty. Sometimes it's an individual plant kind of a thing. I can see why the birds like them though. I don't blame them for spreading them all around our forest. There are sharp spines on them, like all over them. Every spot where a leaf attaches, you got a little cluster, like 3 spines. It's awful. You're going to be wearing gloves and you're still going to get stabbed by them. And then you're not even going to notice until 3 days later, but you'll have a little splinter coming up on your finger. You want to be careful with the spines on this one and just be prepared to remove splinters if you're not able to wear sturdy gloves to protect yourself from it. They don't hurt that bad in the moment, but it's the days later when you're picking splinters on your fingers, it's the worst. Okay. And one of the reasons why barberry is the worst, well, I guess not the worst, they're all the worst, why it's an exceptionally terrible shrub, is that the wood, the habitat it creates for mice can foster more Lyme disease in an environment. And so when you have this area that's protected from predators for mice, you can get more population density, you can get more Lyme disease spreading in the tick population, and that can be pretty bad. So we need to avoid letting it get to any concentrations where it's making a thicket where mice can make a little mousetrapolis. So we're going to keep moving along to the herbaceous invasive plants. So no more woody plants. These are things that you control with something other than cut stone herbicide. So garlic mustard is a biennial, which means it spends 1 year just growing leaves, storing energy, building up a nice strong root. And then the second year, it's going to turn into a flowering plant, and it's going to make its seeds, and then it will theoretically die. Do biennial plants always die after the second year? No, but they're usually supposed to. And when they're not being invasive, they usually die. Garlic mustard frequently will die after the second year, so that's why we call it biennial. It definitely smells like garlic and mustard when you crush it and eat it. It tastes fine if you're not sick of it from spending hours in the woods pulling it. But a great thing to look at for identifying this one is the texture of the leaf. The veins are sort of depressed into it, and it can look a little bit like fine lace. Especially that's helpful for telling it apart from some similar shaped leaves. So the first year it's going to be sort of a small rosette. I'd say if it got up to 8 inches tall, I'd be surprised. They're normally pretty small at this stage, and I don't always bother picking all the rosette ones. A lot of the times I'll focus on the second year ones that I think are going to flower that year. Because if you pulled every single seedling, that would be way more work, and the seedlings often will outcompete each other and they won't all come back the second year. So focusing on the second year plants when you have a large infestation is efficient. The leaves are sort of shaped like a round kidney bean shape, like sort of like a circle with a little mini circle cut out where the stem is. Some people confuse these with wild violets. Wild violets don't smell like garlic when you crush them. So always, do a test if you're not sure. And these leaves are a little bit smaller. They're kind of 2 inches long and across. But then in the second year, they bolt, and they're going to be a little bit longer than they are wide in their second year. The leaves are going to become more triangular in shape. And as the leaves move up the stem, you're going to see more of that distinct shape to it. The teeth on the leaf Whereas with the first year, the teeth are kind of wavy. Like if you were a little kid and you were drawing a cloud, you would draw like a wavy line all around the edge. That's kind of how garlic mustard's teeth are the first year. And then the second year, they're a little sharper. They're still very irregular, different size teeth, not very sharp, but sort of pointy triangular shaped teeth. This is in the broccoli family, so you're going to see the flowers looking a little, or the buds looking a little bit like a head of broccoli, but just super small. And then the flowers are going to be white, like broccoli flowers too. You can eat those too. You can eat the whole thing. And then when they're bunched together like this, they're going to sort of spread out as the plant's going to keep getting longer from the top. And so it's eventually going to elongate into this super tall tower of spread out seed pods. I think they look like string beans. They look kind of weird. Like I imagine aliens having weird fingers, like these long green alien fingers. I don't know. The thing to know about these is that the seed pods, once they're ripe, they will explode when you touch the plant, and then hundreds of little itty bitty seeds will fly up. So you want to start out, start pulling these as soon as you can. In the spring, they bloom and set seed surprisingly fast. Even in May, sometimes you'll start seeing seed pods starting to form, bolting happening. And then as soon as the seed pods start exploding when touched, that's when I stop pulling. You could try getting a really big bag and sticking the plant in and very carefully pulling it while the seed heads are contained in the bag if you just have a couple of them. But if you have a large infestation, that's not going to be effective, and you're just going to end up spreading more seeds than you're preventing from entering your ecosystem right there. So definitely watch out for that part. The spotted knapweed, this one is one of the most difficult ones to control because it's a perennial, and it likes to live in old fields. And so we have a lot of old field habitat up here, a lot of places that used to be hay fields where this is invaded, and it's quite pretty. It makes these beautiful like lilac fields of purple flowers, but it's a toxic plant. It's very invasive, and it makes a chemical that, if you concentrated huge amounts of this chemical, it would probably be carcinogenic. At the levels that it's found in the plant, we don't know that it's of a concern, but we still recommend that everyone wears gloves when they're handling the plant. So I don't think it's a concern if you touch some of this plant accidentally, but I wouldn't spend all day pulling it with my bare hands. It's scratchy and stiff too, so I wouldn't want to. You can see that the stems have this texture to them, and they've got these short little white hairs. They're very stiff and scratchy feeling, and the stems have like a tough woody texture to them. You can see that the leaves are also of that same funny texture. And let me show you with a laser pointer what a leaf is here. So a leaf is actually this whole thing. So all of this is one leaf. You can see that at the end of the leaf, you have the larger leaflets just like these little mini leaves attached to the main leaf. So the end of the leaf, you're going to have this main leaflet, which is bigger than near the base. And so we say that the leaves are pinnately lobed. Pinnate just means it's shaped and arranged like a feather. So if you think of the leaf being sort of arranged the way a feather would be, that can be useful as well. So if you're on a sand dune on Lake Michigan or something, it might be useful to look up what pitcher thistle looks like so you're not confusing them. But pitcher thistle is very soft and downy feeling, whereas this is much scratchier. And once you've looked at a few pictures, it's pretty clear what the difference is. So yeah, so these, and the leaves alternate up the stems as well. Okay, so the most distinctive thing about the spotted knapweed is the flowers, of course. So this is a head with an inflorescence. It's probably like a couple hundred or more flowers in that little flower head. And it has ray florets around the outside, which are the flowers that have petals. Often that's all they have is petals and nothing else. And then the flowers that don't really have much in the way of petals, but they have all the reproductive parts, are in the middle. And that's how everything in the daisy family, the aster family, arranges itself. But the interesting thing about these, the way to tell them apart from similar looking plants, is that that urn-shaped sort of capsule at the base, like the thing that's protecting the ovaries where all the flowers are coming out of, that's got little spots on it. So the tips of the bracts, and the bracts are the little like leaves. It's kind of like the little bracts on an artichoke. All those little bracts are tipped with black, and then the black parts have little bristles coming out of them. The bristles can be white, or they can be kind of dull brownish black. And so you want to look at those specifically to make sure that you have spotted knapweed. If you have a knapweed, it's probably a spotted knapweed, but it's good to know what the difference is. A plant that has a similar looking flower and that it's got a similar arrangement and color is Monarda or bee balm or bergamot, wild bergamot, I guess. And that has a really strong menthol, minty smell, and it doesn't have compound leaves. It just has really simple, triangular, serrated leaves that I like to put in my tea because it makes it taste like Earl Grey. But anyway, the spotted knapweed has that strong taproot, so it can be difficult to pull. And as I said, that chemical, that's the toxic chemical, it can also poison other plants around it. So it's important to remove that from the environment. Okay. The next plant I wanted to share with you is purple loosestrife. It's so beautiful. People thought it'd be great to plant it, but it turns out it gets really aggressive in wetlands. It's herbaceous. It can be 2 to 5 feet tall. I've seen the flower spikes taller than me out in the field, and I'm like 5'2", so the flower spikes get really big. The stem is 4-sided-ish. It's not really square. It's just feel the stem, and it's sort of angular feeling. It's got lots of ridges and edges to it. At the top of the plant, it's kind of like a soft, fuzzy feeling, and down towards the base, it's a lot stiffer and woody. The leaves are normally opposite, but they can do whatever they want. They can be a little bit more alternate or whorled or anything. And the leaves are clasping the stem. So at the very base of the leaf, you'll see there's no stem attaching it to the main stem. There's no petiole. It just sticks right to the stem and wraps around it about halfway. There's some plants that look kind of similar. These are not super distinctive looking leaves. So I like to look at the veins once more. I know it's a little frustrating to look super, super close at the veins all the time, but they're really very different on a lot of plants. So the veins on purple loosestrife have sort of a gutter to them. So I'll get my laser pointer out again and show you, but they have sort of like, so when the lateral veins come off the mid vein, they don't go all the way to the edge. They sort of stop like a millimeter or so short of the edge of the plant, of the leaf. And then they all form like a gutter along the margin that goes towards the very tip of the leaf. And that's something many wetland plants will do to help water come off of the leaf more easily so that they don't get mildewy. And that would be very bad for the plant if it was mildewy all the time. So look for the gutter vein. That can help you determine that you have actual purple loosestrife. But once it flowers, it's pretty distinctive. So the flowers are on a spike at the top of the plant. They're gorgeous. The flowers are also really irregular. Sometimes there's 6 petals, sometimes there's not. The flowers are normally about 1.5 inches, half an inch to 1 inch across, and on these beautiful spikes in wet, mucky soil. They've got this fibrous root system that makes them hard to pull up, and they like, a good amount of sun. Okay, so moving on from identifying all of the invasive plants, now I want to talk about what are some strategies for managing them. The first thing I do is I identify if there's an area that's specific that I want to protect. So sometimes there's a feature like a vernal pool or a rare plant that I think that would be very nice to protect, and I'll start there and work outwards. And sometimes I just look for an area that has good quality biodiversity, doesn't have very many invasive species, and I think that if I start there and work outwards, I can keep that area, that first area, very clean, very few invasives in there, and just work outwards from there. If I started in an area that it was just like an ocean of invasive species, let's say I got rid of 50% of them, the other 50% would still reproduce there, and then they would fill it in the next year, and I'd be constantly playing catch up, that game of 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Whereas if you start in a good spot and you push outwards, like pushing a wall back, you can make progress more quickly. Okay. Also, if you have a dioecious plant like common buckthorn, where you have male and female trees, you definitely want to kill all the female trees first. If you just have male trees on your property, they're not going to reproduce on their own. So, and if there's one male tree anywhere within, wind distance, pollen blowing distance, they're going to get fertilized anyway. So definitely prioritize killing female trees first. Okay, so if you have, some strategies to actually kill them are, we'll start with woody plants. My go-to would be the cut stump treatment, where you cut them down and then immediately you're painting the edge of the trunk. So the plant only has vascular tissue that's alive just on the inside of the bark, just like those couple millimeters on the inside of the bark is really all you need to treat with herbicide. So you really don't need very much herbicide for this method, but you are using a fairly concentrated mixture. People say all sorts of different things. I just take my concentrate and I cut it in half with water. So I end up with like about 27% herbicide, glyphosate, or 22% triclopyr, but anything in that realm is going to work okay. Some people say that like triclopyr is better if you're not able to cut it quite as low to the ground, or if it's in the wintertime, but I've had plenty of success treating it with glyphosate as well. So glyphosate is just the chemical name of Roundup, by the way, and then triclopyr is the chemical name for Garlon. And then there's other common names for them, but those are the most common ones. Yeah, another strategy is to do a basal bark treatment where you get an herbicide like Pathfinder 2 that will penetrate the bark because it's oil-based. And so you don't have to do any cutting with that method. You just have to have good enough access around the base of the plant to be able to paint, or I guess you could spray, but then you want to spread that herbicide in, and you want to get complete 360-degree coverage around the base of that plant all the way to the ground and up about 12 inches off the ground. Maybe a little bit higher if you have a really big tree. But that can be nice if you want to leave your tree standing, if you want to have like standing dead wood on your property. That can be really good for wildlife. Another way to have standing dead wood and kill your tree is to girdle the trunk. So you just make a cut in the bark all the way through that vascular tissue, just through the bark, and then a few millimeters past that is great. And you just paint your cut stump strength herbicide right into that wound. And that'll kill your trees and leave them standing. Those methods are better when you have smaller amounts and maybe larger individuals, whereas the cut stump's great if you just want to clear a larger area that has a lot of smaller brushy stuff. I find with the cut stump treatment and some other herbicide treatments that very, very small stems, like maybe smaller than my pinky finger, don't absorb as much herbicide as quickly. So sometimes you're not going to have success, and those little tiny ones are going to resprout year after year. If it's not bothering you, you could just wait until they get a little bit bigger and then treat them, or you could just keep cutting them every year until they die. They're not going to make it that long anyway. You could also do things like covering them with black plastic. If they're completely covered with like a thick black plastic or tarp where they're not getting any light, then they're not going to be able to resprout. But then you can't plant native plants there because you have a tarp over your ground. You're killing a lot of stuff when you do that too. So there's an alternative. So killing invasive herbaceous plants. So hand pulling is great for things like garlic mustard and other garden weeds. Other things like if you had Dame's Rocket or bittersweet, things like that are easy to hand pull. They've got a taproot that comes out when you pull it. If you have loose enough soil, like maybe you're on a sand dune or something, you might be able to pull the spotted knapweed too. I like to use a tool called a soil knife. You could also use like a flathead screwdriver, a nice big sturdy one, to help make sure that you're getting the entire taproot out. And I like to do a strategy where I pull gently on the base of the plant. I grab it as low as I can. I pull gently and wiggle a little bit. And then once you feel that sort of release, then you pull again. But you kind of got to feel which direction the root is coming from so that you're not snapping roots off left and right. Because they will definitely just grow back again the next year. And often they'll grow back branched off into two. And so whereas before you were going to have one plant to pull and one plant to produce seeds, next year if you don't come back, well, now you have two plants producing seeds. So there might be even more flowers than if you hadn't done that. Some plants that are herbaceous have such dense fibrous root systems that you're not going to be able to pull it. It's just not feasible. Some people will dig out the entire area. That can be very heavy with the amount of soil you're removing. That can be really damaging to the environment. And the amount of soil disturbance that you're causing can just cause a problem where more invasive species will colonize the area, because disturbed soil is a great thing for plants to colonize. Gotta admit someone at the waiting room. Okay, great. Yeah, so with plants that I can't hand pull that are herbaceous, a lot of the times what I'll do is I'll either spray them with 2% glyphosate, usually with a backpack sprayer, or I will hand wick them. So hand wicking is a type of herbicide treatment where I put on my regular nitrile glove, and then I put on like a vinyl glove or like a latex if I have. I'm allergic to latex, but you can use latex, that's fine. You can use like a longer, sort of like a dishwashing glove. I turn the cuff up so the herbicide doesn't drip down my arm. And then I put a cotton glove over that. And then I take a spray bottle, I spray my cotton glove, and I grab the plant, and I'm just painting with my hand all over the plant. Sometimes I will grab the whole plant up into a bundle with my gloved hand, and then I'll just spray the whole bundle of leaves with my sprayer and my gloved hand, and I'll sort of squeeze all over it until the herbicide is sort of spread all over the plant. Some people call it the bloody glove method. But it's called hand wicking professionally. Okay, some more notes on herbicides. You do need to put up signs that say what you used and what the active ingredient, the date and the time, and when people can safely re-enter. Normally that's just like when it's dry. So, basically, pretty quickly. If it's sunny out, like immediately afterwards. And then it's important to note that more herbicide or like a stronger concentration is going to be less effective than the correct amount. So let's say I have like 50% active ingredient and I spray it on a leaf. Any plant, that's just going to kill the leaf so fast that that's not going to get down into the roots. So 2 to 5% spraying on a leaf for most things, that will get down into the roots. 5% is more like if you have a woody plant, 2% is more like if you have herbaceous plants. But just in general, some things you need more herbicide than you would expect, like Phragmites, you might need more than that, but you might need 5%. But anyway, generally adding too much herbicide will kill the leaf tissues before they have time to translocate it down into the roots. So definitely read the label and research what the correct percentage is for what your application is. If you're in a wetland, you're over water, that's regulated by EGLE. That's the Department of Energy, Great Lakes and the Environment. And so you need to apply for a permit for that, which is a little more involved. And you always should be wearing PPE. So personal protective equipment should include like safety glasses, should include gloves, appropriate gloves for what you're spraying. Some herbicides will eat through like your latex gloves a little bit more easily. I like nitrile gloves. I think they're very durable and non-irritating. And then you're going to want to wear long pants, long sleeves, or closed-toed shoes. Hats are good too to protect your head in case you somehow got herbicide on your head. Generally just minimize the exposed skin when you're applying herbicide. And then washing your clothes out in the wash, in a separate load is what the label says to do. And I guess the label is the law. So that's what you have to do. So in the event that you are spraying herbicide and you say, oh no, I accidentally got herbicide on that little oak tree, that little tiny baby oak tree, I got some on its leaf. I will just pluck that leaf right off that little tiny baby oak tree, and it'll have a better chance of surviving than if I allowed the herbicide to sort of to stay on that plant and get down into the roots. It's like being browsed. It's like, herbivory. It's not great for the plant, but it's still a better chance of survival than if the herbicide gets down into the roots. So these are not comprehensive guidelines on herbicide. These are just some basic things I think everyone should know before getting started applying herbicide. There's definitely a lot more to it. So do your own comprehensive research on herbicide safety and read the label. The label's the law, and follow the instructions on the packaging. Let's see. So I thought I would so people always ask, like, which herbicide do I use for this and that? So these are some things that you could use. I'm not saying go to Ace Hardware and buy this specifically. I'm not like recommending these. I haven't used these products specifically, but if I was going to be buying herbicide, what I would look for would be, so let's say I'm doing cut stump treatments. I would look at this bottle and I would see, okay, the glyphosate percentage is 18.2. And then the triclopyr percentage is 2%. That's very similar to what I would use for cut stump treatments. So I would say that brush killer was something that I would probably pick out to use for cut stump treatments. So that's one option. And then for foliar spraying, I look at this and I see, okay, it's got glyphosate in it. It's about 2%. You know, that seems like a good treatment for foliar spraying invasive plants. If you just need a little bit to spot spray around your house. If you are doing, if you do need some equipment for that, then I like these little buckthorn blaster dabber things for just like filling up with just like 4 ounces of cut stump strength herbicide. That way you don't have to be constantly bending over, and you can just apply it without spraying. So there's no overspray. There's no getting it on plants you didn't intend to. You can just get it directly on the stumps, and you can just have a little bit with you. You don't have to carry around a giant container of it. And then also quart size measuring containers are nice to have. So especially if you're storing herbicide or you need to mix and manage concentrations, quart size containers with little like 1 ounce measuring things are handy to have as well. So that's what those look like. If you're treating a lot, it might be worthwhile to buy a larger amount of herbicide. These like 2.5 gallon jugs can be, you know, like $200 or $180 or something like that. And then you have to get, you know, I try to find a way to get free shipping if you can like get a large enough order size together. But oftentimes the shipping will be like $30 for a jug of that as well. So, but if you have a large area to manage, that could definitely be worth it. Especially something like Pathfinder 2, where you're able to just, it's ready mixed. You don't have to do any mixing, and you can just apply it to the base of a trunk for basal bark treatment. That can be really nice. So I usually buy it at forestry suppliers, but you can just enter, you know, the name of the herbicide that you're looking for on like Google, and just go to like the Google shopping page and find whatever the cheapest price at that time is. There's definitely a lot of variation with like which places have the best prices and which places have it available at different times of year. So you do want to shop around a little bit every time you're looking for it. Something I made that I've used a lot in the past for cut stump treatments, just wanted to share that real quick, is these magical wands for dabbing herbicide onto cut stumps. And so it's just a PVC tube with a valve and then a little elbow joint and then a threaded pipe at the bottom. And you can cut a piece of cellulose sponge and screw it into that little thing at the bottom. Sorry, this mouse is tricky. And then you can fill the pipe up with herbicide, and you can sort of just let the sponge get saturated, then close the valve, and then you can dab it on the cut stumps without having to bend over all the time. So PDF instructions for that are available on the internet from this website as well, but they're pretty easy to Google herbicide application wand instructions to find those. Okay. If you don't want to do all the invasive species management on your own and you need advice on how to manage it on your property specifically, maybe you need somebody to come out to your property and tell you what a plant is, whether or not it's invasive, or you need recommendations for contractors or help managing it. CISMAs, or Cooperative Invasive Species Management Areas, are a great resource. So a CISMA is just a group of counties. Well, they represent groups of counties, and they manage the invasive species in that group. So these are all of the ones in our service area, with our service areas highlighted. So for a lot of us, that's the cake CISMA. So you could go to the website and you could go to the contact page, and you could reach out to them for assistance on how to manage invasive species, and you can get more advice on how to manage them as well. And all of the CISMAs are going to provide different suites of services. So you definitely just ask your CISMA what they can do to help you with your issues. All right, that is all I have for now. Does anybody have I guess questions, anything else they'd like to talk about before we wrap up? Just feel free to unmute and let me know if you have any questions. I guess Pat, you can just talk too, since you're here.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. if you cut, do the cut stump treatment, how can you dispose of, the branches and everything that you've cut down? Because can that spread it too if you just, I don't know, throw it in a pile and burn it or something?
Yeah, so you don't need to burn it necessarily. So there aren't too many plants that can reproduce just from the stems of woody materials. And those are typically going to be like wetland plants. And you'd really have to have specific conditions for them to be able to do that. So like if you stuck a piece of a willow stem into the mud at the side of a riverbank, that would grow roots. But if you cut a buckthorn tree down and left it lying in a pile in your yard, it's not going to grow roots.
Ah, okay. That's good to know.
If there's berries on the plant, those berries could sprout, but I think it's impractical to try to remove all of the berries, and it's probably better to just cut it down, manage whatever comes up before that one can manage to create the berries in the first place, and then and then you won't have the production happening.
And can you say anything about this goat business that we keep hearing about? They bring in goats and they eat, I guess, the leaves, but then you're still.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Goats defoliate everything. They'll just go through and they'll eat all the things. They'll even eat like your poison ivy, which is a native plant that we should leave alone if it's not like in human space. If it's out in the woods, we should leave it alone. But the goats will eat all the stuff and they'll defoliate everything from like 5 feet down, and you'll end up with like this barren landscape. And then as stuff is, that can be helpful if you just need to like remove a lot of biomass. You need to remove a lot of mass, but you still need to go through and actually kill all of the woody plants. You're still going to have herbaceous weeds that come back the next year. So, and also it can be a hassle to like fence in areas for goats. So I don't see it as a viable strategy for like conservation managing your land. I'd see it as a strategy for, like clearing brush, but then you still have to go in and like cut down all the woody stuff. So they're okay. Thank you. So I used to work in Ann Arbor, and we tried that in one location, and it just defoliated. We tried it on a little island, and it was fine for that, but it didn't really kill the invasive species there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have 20 acres of spotted knapweed, and I have always regarded it as being somewhat unmanageable. And even as you describe the process, it sort of sounds like a bailing out the ocean type of an exercise. And even if I ever did get it all under control under our 20 acres, it's going to be just a continual battle, just because of what other people in the area are doing. I mean, is that
so? Killing all the spotted knapweed on 20 acres would definitely be a big project. There are people that have done it, and there's definitely, like, we're working on projects to do that sort of thing at LTC, and it's a big project. You have to apply herbicide to kill it all, and then you have to sort of it helps if you disc the soil, like drag the disking thing behind the tractor and you disc the soil, and then you herbicide what comes up again, and then you plant native grasses. It's important to start with grasses, because once you get native warm season grasses like big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, June grass, switchgrass, all those sorts of things established, you're gonna have those native plants that it's hard for the spotted knapweed to compete in that situation. So once you have that healthy native grass prairie, you're going to have a much easier time keeping the spotted knapweed out. And the plus side of starting with all grasses is there are some herbicides like Garland, the triclopyr that I just talked about, that will not kill grasses. So it's only helpful for killing broadleaf plants. It technically only kills things that are dicot. So they came out of their seed and they had 2 little leaves. Those are dicots. So it won't kill lilies, it won't kill trillium, it won't kill Jacqueline pulpits, it won't kill grasses. So you can just spray the whole field and not worry about having to killing your grasses when you're managing any spotted knapweed that comes up in between while that grass is getting established. And then once the grass is more established, you're going to have a lot less spotted knapweed filling in. And then once that's established, then you can seed in with like wildflower seeds as well to get a more diverse prairie. It's definitely a process that can take, in general, at least 5 years to do all
Wow.
that. But yeah, so starting at, taking a old field with invasive species and converting it to a native prairie is definitely a big undertaking. And we do have some people in the area that have done that, and there's some great examples of it in the area, and they're stunning. And I think it's definitely a worthwhile project to start on, but at the homeowner scale, I might recommend starting on a smaller section first. If you're not comfortable using a bunch of herbicide, you can also treat with like black plastic or like tarping and killing it that way. And then after like a season, then planting your native grasses. So there are ways to kill off your spotted knapweed a little bit at a time and get the native grasses established. And then it can be nice to have native grasses established in a small area so they can be like a seed source of some good seeds. And then those might seed into your knapweed area and outcompete. So I guess my biggest recommendation is just to plant strong competitors that are native plants to sort of outcompete your spotted knapweed.
Sounds like the work of a lifetime.
Well, you can do it in 5 years. So, I mean, if you get started now, you can, or, soon, you can enjoy the prairie for many years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before I forget, are you going to post the PowerPoint as well as the video? Because I want to get to some of the links.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll have to ask if there's a way we can just like have a link to the PDF.
Yeah.
Because I was just going to post the video for the recording on YouTube, but I think we'll probably be able to post the slides with the PDF, but I can definitely email the PDF to anybody who wants. If you just email amy@landtrust.org, I can just send them to you.
Wait, can you say that again, your address?
Oh yeah, it's just Amy, AMY.
Yep.
At Land, and our website is landtrust.org. So
Gotcha.
Amy,
Thank you.
okay.
Can I ask one last question?
Absolutely.
As I've looked over how to handle we have 40 acres like this fella here, and autumn olive has pretty much taken it over. And I do see stump pulling as one way to deal with the bigger trees of autumn olive. Is that worth the trouble? I mean, you need, I don't know, a tractor and a special, hitch that can.
Oh yeah, to me that sounds a lot harder. I haven't done the stump pulling.
Yeah.
But taking a chainsaw or a brush cutter with a brush blade on it and cutting down an autumn olive and then putting herbicide on the stump only takes a couple minutes, a minute or two.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Yeah.
I think that the other advantage of doing a cut stump treatment versus a stump pulling or any kind of pulling treatment is when you pull that you disturb the soil. And one of the biggest risk factors for colonization by invasive species is having disturbed soil.
Okay.
When you disturb soil, basically the top 10 centimeters of your soil have like 90% of the stored soil carbon, the microorganisms. So native plants need all that. And when you don't have that, you're a lot more likely to have the invasive species moving in.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Well, does anyone else have questions? Yeah, Pat.
What are some of the mimics of knapweed?
Knapweed, spotted knapweed. So some people think it looks like bee balm, like Monarda, which just has a similar color and shape of flower. Its leaves are totally different though. So the Monarda is going to have like a triangular shaped leaf with serrated edges to it, and then you break it and it smells really nice and like mentholy, like bergamot. And that's a native plant that when that you wouldn't want to kill. But then there's also different species of knapweed besides spotted knapweed, and a lot of them are invasive as well. But there's a few native ones. I don't really see too many. I don't really see them around here. I'm not saying there aren't any around here, It's just overwhelmingly what I see is the spotted knapweed. A lot of the times if something is acting like an invasive, I'll use that as a factor in my identification. So maybe it's winter time and I don't have all my facets of a plant available to look at and to ID it by, but if it's behaving like an invasive species, I'll kind of go by that. And by behaving like an invasive species, what I mean is that it's taking over an environment. Native plants are not able to grow in and amongst it if they're not able to sort of spread. They're not able to cohabitate the way they are with native plants. So you can see that especially if you look at native versus the invasive species of cattails. Sometimes you get cattail that's just like a dense monoculture, all one thing, all cattail. And sometimes you get cattail where it's like, oh, there's a cattail here and a cattail there, and in between you have other flowering plants. So that's another way I can tell them apart. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone else have other questions, other things you want to know about invasive plants? Okay. Well, I did want to mention that we do have a work day where we're going to be doing some cut stump treatment of invasive shrubby woody plants out at the Litzenberger Preserve tomorrow. But if there's too much like rain or snow, we're not going to be able to apply herbicide. And so you can't apply herbicide in the rain and the snow because it washes off. So it's possible that will get rescheduled if the weather is not compatible. Also, if turns out there's 8 inches of snow, we might not be able to park there. So if we do end up having to cancel, we will send out an email to everyone who is registered. So it's important that if you're thinking about going, you register ahead of time. And we'll double check that registration the day of, but like if you register at the very last minute, you should probably call just to check and make sure that that's still happening. All right. Well, did anyone have any last minute questions before we adjourn?
This has been very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you. It's very good.
Excellent. All right. Well, I hope this continues to be useful to people, and I hope that the recording goes up on the website and is continuing to be a useful reference for people. But I want to thank everyone for coming, especially people who came with questions. And I just want to thank everyone for being interested and for caring about invasive plants and for showing an interest in wanting to improve the biodiversity of the beautiful Northern Michigan. All right, I'm going to end the meeting, but you all have a wonderful day. There you go.